Wolves have all but signed Jackson Tchatchoua today. This deal has moved very, very quickly over the last sort of 24 hours really. And it's reported by Liam Keane that Wolves have had a bid accepted for around £10.3 million or €12 million. Now for me, I think it's very important that we speak about the role I think he'll play for Vitor Pereira's side. I think it's very important to speak about him as a player and also taking into consideration his stats, which are somewhat underwhelming, but I want to explain why and explain about him as a player as well. So let's get straight into this one. Now, first up, before everyone gets their back up, these are Tchatchoua's stats. Now, it is very underwhelming when you look at his scouting report. I completely am well aware of that, and I completely get it, 100% I do. And I do have my reservations myself about this deal. I do think the fee, you can't really complain. £10.3 million, it is a relatively decent deal for a player that has got the attributes that he does have. However, as I can obviously show on the screen here, people are going to be underwhelmed. The defensive numbers look woeful, and the offensive numbers don't look great either. Now, for me, I think it's going to be one of them where I think he'll really go on to have a good career at Wolves, and I think he'll be one of them people that comes in and just hits the ground running and surprises people. Now, it's not an overly unbelievable signing. It's not a terrible signing. It's somewhere in the middle. However, like I say, he has got all the physical attributes to make it as a top player. It's just whether he does do that at Wolves. I do hope he does. Now, he's 23 years old, plays for Cameroon. Now, it's very interesting this point as well, and I haven't seen many people speaking about this, is the fact that he's got 10 appearances for Cameroon and made his debut in 2024. So, when it comes to AFCON, there is a chance, especially if he comes in and plays well for Wolves, that he gets called up into that national squad for AFCON. Again, leaving Wolves light in the defensive areas, given the fact that he will be out for maybe 4 games, I'd say, in that tournament, as far as I think they'll go. And then ultimately as well, Agbadou alongside him, another one of the players that will be going to that tournament. So that could cause a few issues. But Tchatchoua as a player does have a lot of physical attributes that I personally like. He is very, very similar to Nelson Semedo in the way that he plays. Nelson Semedo was one of these players that was very underwhelming statistically. And when you looked at him on the ball, he looked very, very decent. But ultimately, the output wasn't there. However, for Tchatchoua, his key passes are more useful than Nelson Semedo. Nelson Semedo would often do all the hard work in getting down the line, progressing the ball for Wolves, but his final ball was pretty underwhelming. Whereas Tchatchoua, his final ball isn't unbelievable, but his key passes, and he often makes a decent amount of key passes per 90 as well. So ultimately, in those areas where Wolves are struggling to create things, I do think he will be better at that. However, Tchatchoua as a player is very much a defensive-minded fullback, more so definitely than the likes of David Muller-Wolfer and Hugo Bueno on the opposite side, and even Herver on his side, to be quite honest. He is more of a defensively solid fullback. Now, for me, I think the signing of Muller-Wolfer, I think his best football is played in the final third. I think he's so effective in that final third. I think he has so many nice touches. We saw briefly against Celta Vigo in the first half as well. But I do think Wolves are looking for a more defensive option on that right-hand side. Maybe because they're not sure on Mosquera's fitness when he does come in, or maybe because also they are concerned about Doherty as well, given the fact that he's obviously getting on a bit now. Maybe they just want someone who's more defensively astute, which I think could be the case as well going into next season. Now, as you can see here, and I've mentioned this briefly with a lot of the players that Wolves have been linked to, they have looked a lot in this market, it feels like, at versatile players. Juan Luis Sanchez, of course, one that's never going to happen and obviously hasn't happened given the fact that Tchatchoua's coming in. But, again, they're looking at versatile players. As you can see here, he's played off the left multiple times in almost all of them positions. He's played off the right numerous times in them positions as well. As you can see, he's played very high up there for one game and as a left-back for one game. But ultimately, he has done it, and he has done that for Charleroi and for Hellas Verona. Now, he's been at Hellas Verona for 2 years, but he spent one of the seasons on loan from Charleroi as well. And generally, I think it's a really impressive sort of thing for a player of his age to go out and get that experience before playing Serie A football, because Serie A football, as much as people like to sort of downplay it, it really isn't that easy. It really isn't. And I do think that Tchatchoua is one of them players that I think he'll be better for it. And I think coming to the Premier League, in terms of his physical attributes, he's very, very sort of physically imposing. He's strong and he is very, very fast. Now, Nelson Semedo was quick. Don't get me wrong, Nelson Semedo was quick, but he was never, lightning fast. And for me, Tchatchoua's got that burst of pace in abundance. And I do think that could prove useful for this Wolves side, given the fact that ultimately there are so many players in this Wolves side that, for me, are lacking pace. There's not that much pace in this current squad, so I think Tchatchoua is going to be a massive, massive help when it comes to that side of the game as well. As you can see, this is Jackson Tchoua's heat map, And it is very, very similar to Nelson Semedo's, which you can see here. Now, of course, Semedo liked to drift inside a bit more and was more comfortable linking up with the midfielders and had to do that a lot more. But that hasn't really been Tchatchoua's role at Hellas Verona, to be quite honest. He's been more of a defensive fullback, someone that hasn't gone forward too much. When he has, like I say, he does make those key passes and does make things happen, and makes things happen probably more than Semedo did, to be quite honest. But as you can see, in terms of profile, in terms of position, they are extremely similar. Now, obviously, as I've said, Semedo drifted inside a lot last season, and that was his game. But I do think, as a profile, it's someone to be excited about. I think everyone wants to see pacey players. Everyone gets excited by pacey players. But the fact that Tchatchoua's a pacey player, he is physically imposing, he is strong. As I've said, he has all the physical attributes to go to the very top. It's just the sort of the mental side of the game and the, at times I think his concentration is pretty poor. Now, of course, he's only 23 years old, so that will improve. I have no doubt that will improve. And again, another young player, of course, Wolverhampton as well, 23 on the opposite side. So again, I've been very critical of Wolves' transfer strategy this summer with regards to bringing in experienced players. It doesn't feel like they have done that much. But for someone who's 23 years old, he's still got decent skin in the game and has played in multiple different leagues, including Italy, where he's played against some top wingers. So generally, I do think it's one of them signings that people aren't going to be overly, excited about. From this video, you're probably not going to be overly excited about it, really. But I don't really want to come in here and just, overly praise him or just, do him a disservice. I want to give a balanced opinion of how I see it. And for me, I think he is one of them players that will go to the next level at Wolves, and I do hope he does do that because, as I've said, physically, he's a monster. I just hope he can sort of work on his defensive capabilities and his offensive side of the game as well, which I think in this back five, I think he's going to have to do anyway under Vitor Pereira, and I do think that will be his role. And I think he'll be very good at overlapping whoever plays on that right-hand side. Say Fer Lopez plays in this area, I think Tchatchoua's going to absolutely love bombing on every single time, just bombing on, making things happen. And as I've said, Wolves need pace, and for me, I think it's a really smart deal, especially for the fee. It's a low-risk deal. And just one final point on the Tchatchoua and Nelson Semedo comparisons. This is by Concept Scouting, as you can see here. Please go and follow him on Twitter. I will leave his links in the description because he's absolutely unbelievable and he will be on the channel at some point. That is in the pipeline. But as you can see here, they are so similar in almost every attribute of the game. So in the red, as you can see here, is Nelson Semedo. And in the mint green is Tchatchoua. Now, ultimately, as you can see here, Tchatchoua is a better crosser of the ball, a more frequent crosser of the ball as well. And as you can see, again, key passes, long passes, he's in and around that area. Very similar to him in regards to long passes. Much better when it comes to key passes than Nelson Semedo. And again, defensive duels he wins a higher percentage of them towards Nelson Semedo. Now, of course, Nelson Semedo's got better defensive actions, progressive passes, stuff like that. But it's all marginal, really. There's not too many where he completely trumps Nelson Semedo. So for me, I just think for Wolves fans who haven't watched a lot of him, this is also a bit of useful data that you can look at and take from this video, hopefully, and something that hopefully you've learned. As I've said, I'll leave Concept Scouting's links in the description below because I think he's absolutely unbelievable at what he does. And the fact that he puts it into data like this will make it more useful for you guys to watch. Now, this for me is how I think Wolves will line up next season, or how I would like them to line up next season in terms of balance. Now, this is obviously the Manchester City game. You wouldn't have thought Tchatchoua would be playing that game. You wouldn't have thought that would be the case. But let's say going forward, this is how I think they probably are best lining up, to be honest. Obviously, Mosquera will come in for where Matt Doherty is at the moment, but ultimately for now and probably for the first few games of the season, Matt Doherty will be playing there. Now, I think it gets very interesting. This side, I think, is actually very decent on paper. Now, I like this side for many reasons. As I've said in numerous videos, Jean Arias wants to cut inside, get in the box. He wants to be here, almost alongside Strand Larsen at times. Wolverhampton will be on the outside of him. He will constantly be making that run from left wing back up the pitch. That's how he's going to be making that run constantly up and down. That is his game. That is how he plays. However, I do think we will see a bit more of a reserved approach from Tchatchoua for perhaps the first few games anyway, to see how he sort of settles into Wolves. I think we will see a more defensive approach for him. Also, obviously, that does allow Wolverhampton to continue to do this, continue going up and down that flank. However, as I've said, I think we also shouldn't forget that Tchatchoua has got lightning pace, and I do think his ability to overlap whoever's playing off the right will make a massive difference for Wolves next season, or could make a massive difference for Wolves. Now, in game, I wouldn't be very surprised if we saw perhaps Arias in this area, Strand Larsen in the middle, and then Fer Lopez dropping in here in these pockets. I really wouldn't be surprised if we were to see that going into the season. I think Fer Lopez wants to be in these pockets. He wants to be picking up that area of space. Anywhere around there, that is the zone he wants to be playing in. He wants to get it on his left foot, similar to Pablo Sarabia in a way, but he does have more work rate and is able to get about the pitch a bit quicker. But I do think that's his zone. He wants to be able to feed the ball into Arias, which we did see briefly in the Celta Vigo game. We did see an attack that ultimately came for that where Arias hit it straight at the keeper. But we want to be seeing that. However, this is where Tchatchoua massively comes into things. As you can see, he'll just be bombing on, constantly bombing on. Eventually, I think that's eventually where this Wolves side will go, especially if Lopez is the regular starter on that right-hand side. I think Tchatchoua will be all up and down that flank, and it will allow Lopez to drift inside and find him at the byline, find him, maybe sometimes cutting it back and just whipping one into the back stick. But generally, I think that's how we'll see it. I do think, as I've said, we could see a lot of this next season where he tries to hit it into that area. But also, as I've said, I wouldn't be surprised if Fer Lopez would pick up the ball here and try and make those inward passes to the on-running Tchatchoua in the box as well. So generally, I think there's a lot of options for Wolves next season, to be quite honest. And I do think it's really exciting. But I would love to see at a point next season, Tchatchoua getting forward, showing what he can do more often, and also potentially Wolver on the other side. I think it's a very exciting side, and that's just a brief overview of how I could see Wolves attacking next season, in my personal opinion. Thank you everyone for watching this video, I really appreciate it. If you did enjoy, I'd really appreciate it if you would like the video, share it with your friends, check out my socials in the links as well below. I'm just Connor Talks Football on social media, so TikTok and Twitter as well if you want to check them out. And subscribe to the channel more importantly, as we are so close to 2,000 subscribers. We're about 65 away now, which I said before the start of the season, which actually is tomorrow. But I hope we can reach 2,000 subscribers soon. It would mean the absolute world to me. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you've learned something about Tchatchoua and have got a little bit more excited about the signing itself. And I'll see you in the next one.